Is Voodoo Vince underrated? Voodoo Vince is a platformer developed by Beep Industries, who, as far as I can tell, made no other console games before or since. Game designer Clayton Kozleric has been keeping a running blog for the past decade, but searching through it, I was unable to really find any history of the game's development. Voodoo Vince just sort of arrived exclusively on the Xbox back in 2003 and was quickly forgotten. Perhaps this is because Voodoo Vince was met with average review scores upon release. G4 TV gave the game a 3 out of 5, stating, "There just isn't much gameplay in this gaming gumbo to set it apart from the countless other platformers out there." IGN scored the game a 7.6 out of 10, noting, "The responsive controls, crisp graphics, admirable sound, and early LucasArts-like humor are only slightly marred by the sometimes iffy camera and linear design." And finally, Xbox Nation magazine gave the game a 5 out of 10, proclaiming, "A good gimmick can only carry a game so far, and Vince simply doesn't have, to speak in a rough language of the streets, enough junk in the trunk to elevate it far beyond mediocrity." So, is Voodoo Vince really this average? Let's take a look. The story of Voodoo Vince starts at Madame Charmaine's voodoo shop, where a pair of goons hired by Cosmo the Inscrutable steal some powerful zombie dust. Madame Charmaine tries to warn them of the dangers, but she is promptly hit in the head with a chair. The goons then kidnap her and the zombie dust. Thankfully, her voodoo doll Vince came to life after being sprinkled with the dust, and it's now his mission to rescue his captured owner. The adventure kicks off in the French Quarter of New Orleans, Louisiana. The opening level acts as a tutorial of sorts, showing you all the different maneuvers. The basic attacks include punching and spinning. The spinning is more versatile, but does less damage. Vince can also perform a double jump as well as hover. Defeated enemies will drop a bunch of beads, because this is New Orleans and all, which replenish Vince's health and magic. The magic meter is Voodoo Vince's main gimmick. As he is a voodoo doll, harming himself will cause damage to those around him. At first, this is a simple pin attack, but collecting these wooden dolls will add new attacks to Vince's arsenal. While these attacks are cool and creative, especially considering all of the enemies must have dozens of death animations, the attacks don't actually do anything different. They all have the exact same radius and all cause instant death to any enemy within range. Next, there is zombie dust scattered throughout each level. Collect 100 of these and you add to Vince's life bar. Finally, there are skull pages. Collecting all of these will reveal a skull. Collect the skull, which is a timed obstacle course, and your magic meter will get bigger. The nice thing about the collectible items is they are optional. Throughout the normal course of gameplay, you'll naturally accrue plenty of zombie dust, assuring your life bar grows along nicely with the difficulty curve. Before I forget, you can also perform a head slam by jumping, then pressing the attack button. Honestly, other than during one specific boss battle, I never used this attack. The thing is, Vince almost has too many different moves, utilizing all 4 face buttons plus both triggers, and different combinations of buttons and triggers. It can be a touch overwhelming when you first dive in. Anyway, the levels themselves do a terrific job blending collecting with linear level design. I also love how Voodoo Vince is very much objective-based. You always have to trigger one thing to unlock the next, sort of like the board game Mousetrap. On the 4th level of the adventure is City Square. Each store is only open for a few hours. You have to change the time on the clock, so a new store will open. You can jump along the vertical platforms to get the clock or find the apple. Give the apple to the horse statue, then stand behind said horse and he'll kick you right up there. Very cool. Anyway, you bring a hat you find in an alley to enter a costume contest. Take the money you earn from the costume contest to the pawn shop and buy a horn. Take the horn to the jazz club to learn a song, and then use this knowledge to play a song with this skeleton, who will then open a gate for you. After clearing the French Quarter, Vince heads down to Roach Fort. Here, the theme changes from the city, but everything still looks like it was built by Dr. Seuss, maintaining a sense of continuity. Anyway, the collecting elements along with the linear level design remain here. Basically, this turtle needs you to collect 3 items so she can build a hot air balloon. In return, she'll allow you to tag along on the escape. Down here, Voodoo Vince continues to do a good job mixing up the gameplay without straying too far from the core mechanics. Here, you have to pick up an explosive can of rocket fuel. As it's explosive, you can't get too close to the flames. Vince can't jump and you can't fall off cliffs. Instead, you have to navigate your way across one-way elevators to maneuver your way up the level. There are no enemies to avoid, but figuring out the appropriate path through the stage reminds me of a maze, mixed with some basic logic. Another area has you jumping across rows of floating platforms, almost like the opposite of the game Frogger. While these are minor, they do an awesome job keeping Voodoo Vince from feeling stale and boring as the story progresses. Anyway, after collecting everything needed for the hot air balloon, the turtle tosses you overboard as it seems poor Vince weighs too much to allow liftoff. Vince is forced to use some leftover gas to inflate his head and finally escape the underground Roach fort. The next world is Crypt City. Again, the level design returns back to something distinctly Louisiana, a cemetery complete with above-the-ground crypts. Again, the architecture is absolutely awesome, with virtually no right angles and exaggerated features. Now would also be a great time to talk about the overall level design. Myself, I'm not much of a collect-a-thon gamer. Wandering around aimlessly searching for little trinkets is not my idea of fun, but I didn't feel much fatigue while playing through Voodoo Vince. In fact, on a couple of occasions, I went ahead and completed a level 100%, which is something I don't normally do. But there is something very well thought out and fun about the way items in Voodoo Vince are laid out. I didn't find myself backtracking all that much. If you keep your eyes open, you should notice all the little nooks and crannies in a stage and obtain a majority of the items simply because the designers arranged everything in a logical way, rather than scattering crap randomly through a level. Crypt City also introduces a new gameplay concept, the cannon. This works exactly like you expect, requiring you to guess at the speed and angle required to hit a tiny target off in the distance. In this case, the level's exit. Moving on, Voodoo Vince keeps introducing new twists to the gameplay. Here, you have to bring a light to a crypt to attract the ghost back to its home. If an enemy touches the light, they will attract the wandering ghosts and you'll lose the level. For the first time, Voodoo Vince requires you to start using those magical attacks you've been acquiring but mostly neglecting. As there is a massive horde of enemies, your only hope for success is using the magic, which can take out a majority of them with a single spell. I do appreciate the designers finally forcing this alternate attack approach. Another power is introduced during the crypt levels, the all-seeing eye. I mentioned earlier you can find a majority of the zombie dust, wooden dolls, and skull pages just because things are laid out logically. Well, if you missed any, the all-seeing eye will allow you to see the location of everything in first-person view. Again, as I'm not much of a hide-and-seek gamer, this is an awesome addition to the game. Moving on, we arrive at the Brusque Manor. Here, Voodoo Vince goes over the top with what I like to call clever moments. Moments in a game where you think, man, I wouldn't have thought of that. The manor is 3 stories tall and each level rotates. Rotating each piece of the manor will reveal new doors and passages. It actually reminds me a bit of D, only fully realized and a lot less frustrating. Next, we arrive at the Bayou. Again, I love how the developers stuck firm with the whole Louisiana theme. Platformer staple gimmicks like snow, jungle, and fire just aren't found here. Instead, the developer stuck firm with the Louisiana set pieces, and I think the game is far better off because of it. But back to the Bayou. Here, we have another level where we have to venture off and collect different items to complete the overall task. In this case, it's making gumbo. One level has you punching onions to the center of the level to be trapped by a cage. The next level has you flipping levers and switches to correct all the conveyor belts and doodads to properly send these cute little animals into a sausage-making machine. Again, I can't help but think of Mousetrap here. And finally, there is a single underwater section where you lure a crawdad into a trap. At this point, I also noticed Voodoo Vince slowly getting more challenging. As the game progresses, there are more enemies to deal with, and they are more challenging, taking a few extra hits in addition to having some defensive maneuvers. The platforming too slowly ramps up in difficulty with more bottomless pits and tighter jumps. Another gimmick is also added, golden rings, which Voodoo Vince can swing across similar to other platformers of the time, but this is just a primer for the final area of the game. the Carnival Deprave. This final area of Voodoo Vince is just brutal. The House of Mirrors level requires you to have mastered all the jumping techniques available to Vince, as well as a lot of patience. You see, this level is basically a circular maze, and your goal is to try to make it to the center. However, you can use the all-seeing eye and use uncollected items to see where you haven't been yet, which is nice. After completing a pair of levels to turn on the Carnival's power as well as the rides, we finally make our way towards the final boss. Basically, you have to jump from ride to ride to get to a massive tent housing Cosmo and the goons who kidnap Madame Charmaine. This is an immensely challenging bit of platforming, and falling off any of the rides will result in you having to start the sequence all over again. Before moving on to the final boss, let's first talk about the first 5. These rely on Vince harming himself in order to do damage to the boss. These are also set up like platforming stages, where the boss really only serves to make the journey more challenging with their attacks. You have to dodge this T-Rex's tail, for example, while activating the switches necessary to allow Vince to get struck by lightning. In another area, you have to jump onto a trampoline located on the boss's back. This launches you high in the arena, where a switch opens up some spikes on the floor. The switch is timed, however, so you have to do a head slam onto the spikes before the trapdoor closes. I love how the designers changed things up and mixed in challenging platforming and mild puzzle solving to defeat bosses, rather than just clumsy combat with the bosses themselves. But as cool as all of these are, none of them compare to the final boss, the Cosmo Bot. Like the bosses preceding it, this one relies on platforming and self-harm. Only the difficulty is through the roof, as one would expect. The first half of the fight has you in a bumper car, flipping switches to open up temporary stops. Hit these to launch into a target. Do this 3 times to disable the Cosmo Bot. Next, you make your way up the outside with tricky platforming, tough swings, and an airplane section. Complete this and you move on to Phase 2, inside the bot, and a merciful save point. Again, the difficulty here is high, with some of the toughest platforming found in the game. The jumps require precision with multiple moving targets. The swinging is made more difficult with obstacles blocking your path. Throughout this section are 3 different events which cause harm to Vince, which damages the brain powering the Cosmobot. After finally making your way to the very top, you can attack the brain and the game has been beaten. The final cutscene has Vince and Madame Charmaine reuniting and teaming up to dispatch the goons and Cosmo the Inscrutable. It's a cute little moment and a great way to end the game. And of course, the credits roll. So with the gameplay out of the way, let's take a look at the graphics. For being a 3rd generation Xbox game, the graphics are solid, as one would expect. There are few technical issues to speak of whatsoever. No clipping, no pop-up, no screen tearing, no frame rate drops, nothing. I do wish the game ran at 60 frames per second, but at least it's consistent. That said, Voodoo Vince is a very good-looking game. Polygon counts are high, the textures are generally nice, and the designers did an awesome job lighting up the different levels, giving them each an organic feel, matching the exaggerated architecture found through the entire game. Vince himself is well animated, as are all of the enemies found throughout the adventure. Both technically and artistically, Voodoo Vince is a visual treat. For as awesome as the visuals are, the sound just blows it away. First, the voice acting is all spot on. Vince sounds more like Adam Carolla than a kid, helping the game feel a bit more mature and less childish. Cosmo is also well acted, and while neither character are given the best dialogue to chew on, the jokes aren't too bad and the cutscenes never wear out their welcome. On the flip side, the soundtrack is just sensational. Just as the art direction and level design do a wonderful job fitting the Louisiana setting, the music follows suit with a ton of different jazz beats, really knocking the atmosphere setting out of the park. There just isn't anything else to say here. The score is simply perfect. Alright, with all that out of the way, we arrive back where we started. Is Voodoo Vince underrated? Let me just say this, Voodoo Vince just might be the most underrated game I've ever played. This isn't some generic platformer with slick visuals and a nice soundtrack. Voodoo Vince is one of the very best platformers I've ever played. First, it doesn't just slap a bunch of cliched set pieces together. Instead, it stays laser focused on its southern roots. Next, the controls are excellent. Every single death I experienced was my own fault, from tackling an enemy incorrectly or just not being aware of my surroundings. No death is cheap, and every single death is a moment to learn and grow. I call this progression. Speaking of progression, gameplay concepts are built up with each passing level. Early on, you might have to set Vince on fire and then keep the flame going on your way to blowing up a pair of mischievous gas tanks. Later in the adventure, you must combine the cannon mechanic to launch Vince through a flame to catch fire, and then use the limited time available to set fire to dynamite, which you had to locate and correctly place near an enemy. There are just a ton of little moments like this where the previous concepts are built upon and expanded on, forcing you to actually take a moment and think your way through the levels. Next, mini-games are just that, mini-games. There is a flying section, a racing section, an on-rail shooter, and another area where you make your way down a massive clothesline, switching lines to collect items. None of these are overly long, breaking the flow of the game, and they are all executed perfectly, never being a frustrating waste of time. And finally, Voodoo Vince feels different from every other platformer I've ever played. The game is very dark, fitting the whole voodoo theme, while also being extremely colorful and offering a variety of set pieces, a unique art direction, and an overall high level of polish. While Voodoo Vince didn't light the world on fire back in 2003, I feel the near extinction of 3D platformers has really helped the game. Games like this just don't exist anymore, and it makes going back and playing some of these obscure titles feel incredibly refreshing. Perhaps this is the best word to explain Voodoo Vince. The New Orleans theme, awesome jazz music, excellent controls, wonderful level design, perfect balance of platforming, puzzle solving, and collecting, unique self-attacks, adolescent humor, add up to one of the most refreshing platformers I've played in quite some time. If you somehow missed this game when it was new, I highly recommend snatching it up. The game is simply brilliant.